Greater efficiencies, lower costs, endless opportunities to innovate. Just a few of the benefits digital technologies are said to be bringing us all. So why do some fear they'll also lead to a jobless future, with developing nations deprived of the means to grow their economies? In the second of 2 special reports on the digital revolution, Bob Abeshouse asks how we should be preparing for the changes ahead.
Digital automation on display at this expo in Chicago last March may have a more profound effect on society than the technology that powered the Industrial Revolution.
What this is an autonomous intelligent vehicle that is able to safely negotiate around people. We often see that in hospital, trying to move around labs.
Experts say advances in robotics, machine learning, and cognitive computing are fueling inequality and could lead to a jobless future that threatens economic growth and political stability.
A robot like this can negotiate these payloads all day and never get bored, never get distracted, never bring something to the wrong spot.
Others argue that today's digital revolution will generate new businesses and better jobs to replace those that are lost.
People are able to do really complex jobs. When you have somebody pushing around a cart all day, there is something that's going to be better and more efficient for them to do.
Whatever the case, governments and policymakers need to prepare for a future of growing digital disruption and a challenged middle class. Because a new generation of robots is emerging with greater perception and functionality than ever before, nowhere more so than in industry.
The development of this actually landed us on the global list of the top 50 companies to watch out for in the arena of robotics.
Kevin Ambrose is the CEO of Winright, a company that provides material handling and distribution systems.
We call it a robotic truck unloader.
This robot autonomously loads and unloads trucks. It can distinguish between different products when stacking them or preparing them for shipment.
You guys are already at the forefront in terms of robotics. What is the breakthrough technology that this represents? What are they?
Yeah, so I would say number one is the 3D perception technology. There's actually a camera on the end of that, and what it's doing is when it scans it, it's finding the height, width, depth, and where it's going to actually reach and make contact with that carton to pull it off.
Is it pre-programmed in terms of the different box sizes?
Yeah, no, and that's the beauty of it. It's not pre-programmed. The vision software is the ability to actually read, an entire load and break it down into the various elements for removal and then determining where it needs to go. And it's doing that on a carton by carton basis.
And in the past, all of those things required humans?
Yes. Solutions like this may replace a manual task like the actual unloading, but you have to have another skill set. So we train those operators to now elevate up into that skill set level to be more of a technician as opposed to just a pure laborer.
The skills manufacturing workers need to hold on to jobs are also changing as a result of advances in robotic sensors and software.
And what I'll show you today is the UR3, which is the newest family member here at the Universal Robots family.
Enrico Iversen is the CEO of the Danish company Universal Robots. It is a leading manufacturer of a new generation of robots called collaborative because they can work alongside humans in a wide range of applications.
The industries that we are targeting have revenue in North America at about a little more than 400 billion. If we look at where this robot will do perfectly, what we see is there's a lot in consumer electronics, computer manufacturing, small household appliances.
The ease with which these robots can be set up and programmed makes them attractive.
It's very simple. Anything you can do with your arm, we can do with the robot.
Until recently, the use of a robot in manufacturing required a skilled programmer to control its movements. You can direct a universal robot by simply positioning the arm and pressing a button.
So you're actually setting the movements for each place that the arm's going to stop?
Yes. Basically now, everything is done, so I can just hit play. You're up and running in less than an hour from you receive your boxes. price range here is somewhere from 23 to 45,000 US dollars for the robot. You end up with a payback time of somewhere between 3 to 9 months. And of course that is very, very beneficial for all manufacturing industries.
Don't you think a robot like yours can take away jobs?
I say that is not true. Some people will be working side by side with robots, and other people, they will start servicing the robots.
So this shows our projection on labor cost savings for different countries in the year 2025.
So this shows that 25% of the manufacturing tasks in the world will be done by robots, and it will produce a 16% savings in labor costs.
That's correct.
Hal Sirkin is a senior partner at the Boston Consulting Group in Chicago. An expert on the impact of robotics on manufacturing, he released his latest report on the subject earlier this year.
What we're seeing now is that the costs of robotics are becoming, in many industries, cheaper than the cost of the labor. And what we project now is in the next 10 years, we'll see about a doubling in the amount of robotics that are going to be being used in factories in the US and around the world.
And in some countries, it's going to be much higher, right?
That's right.
In 2014, the worldwide supply of robots increased by 27%. 60% of the growth was in Asia. Why is China the biggest robotics market today?
Because the economics are right. What they're seeing is very quickly rising wages. Some peg it at about 16 or 17% per year at different times. And therefore, their costs are going up dramatically.
Sirkin argues that in the future, cheap labor costs will be much less important in determining the location for manufacturing.
Right now, there's a big wave of everybody chasing the lowest cost country. When you get to a reasonable steady state in the robotics level, what will happen is everybody will have essentially the same cost, and therefore people will start to localize. You won't have the ability to have these 25% cost differentials between countries anymore as all of this starts to take shape.
For decades, low-wage countries have used manufacturing as an engine of prosperity, luring production from abroad with cheap labor costs. Developing economies would progress as experience was gained and manufacturing evolved from goods like textiles and shoes to TVs and computers. People were able to move from the countryside to jobs in the city, and wages would rise.
This route to growing rich that developing countries used to be able to have, where they work their way up the manufacturing value chain, isn't really there anymore.
Ryan Avent is the economics correspondent for The Economist magazine. While robotics will also create problems in China, Avent has written that it may be among the last countries able to develop through manufacturing.
Well, Shenzhen 30 years ago was a fishing village, and then China sort of allowed changes in the policies there that enabled firms to come in from abroad and put factories that employed the masses of cheap labor that southern China had available. And over time, those factories have become more and more sophisticated until you have Foxconn, which is employing 250,000 people, making kind of advanced electronics. And this is the model we would expect lots of countries to be able to follow in order to get rich in the way that China's gotten rich. But the rub is that those jobs aren't now moving from Shenzhen to Vietnam or to Bangladesh or wherever. They're staying in China, and they're staying there in large part because robotics have become incredibly cheap.
Is there anything that can replace manufacturing as an engine of prosperity for developing economies?
If there's another way to develop without relying on manufacturing, we really haven't figured out what it is yet.
Advances in robotics also mean that production that was sent abroad to tap cheap labor is coming home, what's known as reshoring.
If you're an American company saying, we need to put a factory somewhere, and you can just have it completely automated and put it in Ohio for the same cost that you could put it in Bangladesh, then why not put it in Ohio, where it's closer to the domestic market, it's closer to your headquarters.
A good example is the textile industry in the U.S. Beginning in the 1990s, it was decimated in places like Gaffney, South Carolina. Spooling, spinning, and sewing headed to China, India, and other countries where labor was cheap.
The first time I ever had to lay anybody off, the reaction I had personally made me question whether I had what it takes to be in this business.
Andy Warlick is CEO of Parkdale Mills. In order to compete, Parkdale invested heavily in digital automation, robotics, and spinning technology. It opened a mill in Gaffney in 2010. Today, Parkdale is America's biggest spinner of cotton yarn.
With our service and our speed to market, we can overcome some of the lower cost operators in other parts of the world, even against people who are paying 20 cents an hour.
The Gaffney mill produces about 2.5 million pounds of yarn a week with about 140 workers. That production level would have required more than 2,000 workers in 1980. In fact, far fewer manufacturing jobs are returning to America than were sent abroad, and many of the new jobs are for skilled technicians to keep the digital machinery running.
Robotics will create some jobs. They'll be much more sophisticated. You'll see engineering kind of jobs. You'll see computer programming kinds of jobs. You'll see mechanical kinds of jobs.
People who sell robots claim that it doesn't lead to a loss of jobs. That's not true, is it?
It all depends on how some factors play out. From a U.S. perspective, it's probably a pretty good story because the U.S. will reshore a lot more goods.
But everyone can't be doing that. There's jobs being lost elsewhere, right?
Right, well, and it's a global market. So it's very country dependent. The U.S. has a very flexible workforce, which means the ability to hire and fire. And therefore, you can move robotics in and people out. Now, when you do that, of course, you're going to add a different kind of layer of people in there, people who are much more tech savvy and who know how to control the robots.
Some experts argue that training people for these new middle-class jobs is a key to dealing with digital job loss. They point to Germany's apprenticeship system as a model. In Stuttgart, a center of German manufacturing, companies like Bosch have 3-year vocational training programs. Young people are taught mechatronics, a combination of mechanical, electronic, and computer skills.
Robotics is one important direction that this mechatronics thing is going.
Wolf Bonsiep oversees the vocational training of 13,000 Bosch associates in Stuttgart. How does the dual training apprenticeship program work in Germany?
The first part of the vocational training is more in theory, and the second year, third year are more practical. They are going and working inside the shop floor and inside the plants. The biggest benefit is when there is something changing in the plant, in the industry, it's already in the vocational training. It's not like that the university has to react over years to new trends. No, the young people are learning it from the beginning in the plant.
Haben wir früher immer von Hand gemacht mit Mitarbeiter und machen wir jetzt mit dem APAS-Roboter.
It costs about $25,000 a year to train an apprentice in mechatronics. Axel Hambrecht and Karina Velte are in the second year of the program at Bosch's Diesel Systems factory in Stuttgart. How do your friends who go to college regard apprenticeship programs like this?
Auch gut, also viele finden es auch gut, dass wir eine Lehre machen, weil wir dann schon wissen, was wir machen wollen, weil viele, die nur auf die Schule gehen, die wissen noch nicht genau, was sie machen wollen.
Das funktioniert, also das finde ich ziemlich spannend an diesem System, dass man gleichzeitig in der Schule und im Betrieb etwas machen kann.
We have the tradition of this dual education with a combination of public schools, public vocational schools and companies. So I think it's worthwhile to copy, but it's difficult to copy because you need a lot of companies who want to invest in their people, to accumulate knowledge.
Germany has a job-sharing policy that could also point the way for countries dealing with job loss from automation. It's called short-time work. Instead of laying off workers in the 2008 recession, German companies reduced employee hours. A government subsidy made up for lost wages. As a result, the country's unemployment rate barely increased. Do you think job loss associated with advances in digital technology may require the type of job sharing you have here in Germany?
Yeah, that could be a solution. The basic model is to have less workers, less hours a week, so you need more workers.
Don't you think robotics and other digital advances are going to lead to less jobs in Germany?
The semi-skilled workers and unskilled workers, we will see less in the industrial production, I'm sure. But in the end, a new connected industrial production will offer us totally new markets for new products, and so suddenly we need even more people in production.
Germany has built this model, this export-oriented model, where they have lots of people working in middle-skill jobs in manufacturing. And there are only so many of those sorts of manufacturing jobs to go around, really. And so if the US were to become much better at doing those kinds of things, I think you would see much less growth in that sort of employment in Germany.
Do you think the vocational training and apprenticeship programs in Germany are a model for other countries to emulate?
I mean, I think it's worked incredibly well for Germany. I think that when you look at the labor market in a place like the US, If the US gave people more options to kind of do that sort of vocational training, we might be able to move more people toward these jobs, which end up paying pretty well, and that would be a great thing for a lot of people. But I think we should be realistic about what it means for long-run pay rises, which is probably not going to happen.
Pay for middle and low-wage workers has been stagnant in the U.S. since the 1970s, while capital's share of GDP has increased. The continuing investment of companies in robots and other digital automation promises further downward pressure on wages in the future.
What kind of education might ameliorate some of these issues?
If you sort of look at the history of the Industrial Revolution, education was probably the most important part of the response to that. It's not going to be the most important part of our response to the digital revolution. In the rich world, at least, most people are already pretty well educated, where they weren't 100 years ago. And the wage rates for college graduates have also been fairly stagnant over the last 15 years. And so that should cause us to think a little bit about whether education is going to be the main way that we recreate the middle class and recreate a world in which living standards are always rising for most people.
So where are the middle class jobs of the future going to come from?
We've seen the kind of growth of this sort of craftsman economy where more people are doing tasks that people value because, you know, it's kind of artisanal production. We have the website Etsy, which is a way in which technology allows people scattered all over the world to produce crafts and sell them and make a living in that way. And then, you know, it's possible maybe that technology will open up new forms of industry that are actually kind of labor intensive. And I think fracking is one example of that. And potentially we could see that in a lot of different sectors. Whether that's going to deliver enough employment at good enough income to sort of make up for the difference or make up for the loss from automation is an open question.
Germany is betting that the good-paying jobs of the future will come from replacing fossil fuels. Of all the countries in the world, it is making perhaps the biggest commitment to building a green cleantech economy. Unicus, a Berlin firm, is at the forefront of efforts to expand renewable energy use. Clemens Triebel is the founder of the company and its chief of research.
This is a test facility where we try to get a feeling for the behavior of renewable with conventional energy. You can see here the transmission line to get the real behavior in a grid when you have more renewables.
Electricity grids today that include renewable energy can be extremely inefficient and unstable. Since solar and wind energy fluctuates, today's grids are limited to getting only 10 or 20% of their power from renewables.
Unicus developed a special software to stabilize the grid, penetrated by a high amount of renewables by using battery technology.
They invented a system of software and batteries that reacts instantly to peaks and drops in wind and sunlight. This enables a higher allocation of renewable energy into the grid all the time.
If we want to get up to 40%, 50%, 60%, you have to get rid of the old system. We are smoothing the peaks in the grid because the reaction time of a battery and an inverter is 8 milliseconds, okay? It's 1,000 times faster than any old system.
Unicus is growing fast and expects to have 200 employees by the end of the year. But digital systems like the one it is developing can have vast implications for employment.
I personally believe that we will transform the energy world completely in the next 50 years, all over the world. We will get rid of all fossil power plants. We will get rid of all nuclear power plants. And now we are acting with less than 5% renewables all over the world, okay? We have 95% to substitute, and this will create a lot of jobs. Because this is right at the beginning, very, very early stage.
Don't you think the renewable sector will also eliminate a lot of jobs?
If you want to substitute the existing energy world by renewables, you would need the same amount of jobs, I think so. But even if we don't create the same amount of jobs, how much cost will you cause if you don't react to the climate change?
I think that some parts of the green economy is very much job creator. There's a lot of good things governments can do to create jobs by building new infrastructure, investing in renewable energy, and things that we will need to have a sustainable future.
Frey points out that technological advances may be harming people as workers, but are benefiting them as consumers.
On the supply side, I'm very optimistic. I think we will see new technologies increase productivity, potentially even more in the past, and I think we will be able to produce things more and more cheaply, so also low-skill, low-income families will be able to afford an even wider range of technologies than they are today.
So I think the advances in MOOCs, for example, massive open online courses, are very exciting. That will enable the delivery of high-quality education to an increasingly large fraction of the world's population. And I think developments within our own field of machine learning will increasingly enable us to provide algorithmic tutors to optimize their learning experience.
You can imagine a world maybe where it turns out not to be the threat that we think it will be, because the cost of so many things falls so much. It's that higher education suddenly becomes just a minor expense. That healthcare becomes so much better as a result of technology that it just doesn't cost very much. Or maybe you have an expansion of the sharing economy. Maybe that just keeps expanding, and so we just don't need the consumer purchasing power to grow in the way that it used to. But that's a big if.
Do you think the digital revolution is a threat to capitalism?
I do think digital technologies pose a real challenge to capitalism. The way most people go and get the money they need to spend on whatever they need is by finding a job in the marketplace. And if we can no longer count on market work to allocate purchasing power, to give people the money they need to spend on these things, then everything sort of falls apart.
You run into a kind of a catch-22 situation where things become so unequal, where you've got just a tiny number of people really hoovering up all of the income in the economy, and these will tend to be the people that own these companies or own the machines. But those people really can't spend enough to drive the whole economy.
What do you see as the solution to the threats you identified?
I think that the best and most viable solution is probably some form of guaranteed income eventually. If we give people a basic income and then, create an incentive for them to do other things on top of that, whether it's working part-time or starting a small business or perhaps even doing, volunteer things, then I think we can create a new kind of economy that gives people enough purchasing power to survive and to participate in the economy while they still do constructive things.
In a sense, couldn't the problem be self-correcting in that if there's not enough consumer power, there won't be the drive to innovate and create these new products because there'll be no one to buy them?
To some extent that can happen, yes, but of course that's not what we want. We don't want to dampen down innovation. But there's also another aspect of this. If we get into a situation where there isn't a lot of market demand out there, entrepreneurs and venture capitalists and so forth may look at this and they may decide that the best place for investment and for innovation is really in these cost-cutting areas, in building robots that take more jobs.
There's always a possibility that that can happen. On the other hand, if you watch the history that we've had, what we see is an ever-increasing amount of goods for people.
So you're very optimistic about robotics?
Yeah, I'm very optimistic. It is something that people may fear, and every increase in productivity people have feared, but nevertheless things have gone quite well, and it is part of the natural evolution of business.
Technological change from the Industrial Revolution led to decades of conflict between companies and workers, capital and labor. Do you think the digital revolution is going to lead to the same thing?
Well, there'll always be tensions. Anytime we change a system that is working for a better system, there will be tensions in that. And yes, there will be needs for new social contracts and different ways of working.
I think it's going to be a very difficult thing for society to work out what the right solution to this is. I think it's inevitable that it's going to involve more redistribution. It will probably take changes to the political system, different groups organizing in different ways.
Silicon Valley's on the rise. Now it's time to organize.
Back in the San Francisco Bay Area, the epicenter of the digital revolution, political efforts to deal with the effects of technological change are underway.
Social norms just don't evolve overnight. It takes generations. Probably there is a new and better way of organizing the economy and work so that everyone benefits, but we haven't discovered it yet. And the process of getting to that new equilibrium is going to be a messy one.